Hello, everyone. Hello, Ollie.
Hi everyone, hi Marcos.
Fantastic. All right. So this week we are taking another look at some plants in signs, medicinal plants in different signs of the zodiac. And we've come round to Capricorn because we're filming this just before Capricorn season starts, about 2 days before the winter solstice. Um, so we've picked two plants as usual that we think would probably fit into Capricorn. I'm going to use the usual, which is Abu Mashar's The Abbreviation of the Introduction to Astrology, and just do a little reading on Capricorn, and then we'll dive straight into the plants. Capricorn is the house of Saturn, and the exaltation of Mars is in its 28th degree. Mars is exalted through the whole sign. It just means that Mars is strongest in the 28th degree of the sign. It has three decans. The first belongs to Jupiter, the second to Mars, and the third to the Sun. Its nature is cold and dry, earthy, black bile, and it is feminine, nocturnal, and tropical. In its first part, the daylight begins to increase over the night. Round of incomplete figure, possessing two essences and two natures, which is interesting. I think that comes from the constellation which the sign is originally named after, the sea goat. Its first half is earthy, belongs to the land, and is dry, and sometimes it indicates riding animals and failure to produce men, meaning infertility, I think. Its latter half is watery and belongs to the sea, abounding in children, twins of children, and indicating birds. This is really interesting. This isn't stuff you'd find in modern, designations of this sign, descriptions of this sign. To it belong earth, ploughing, grass, and plants, and the insects of the earth, corrupt, beautiful in its way of life, weak in voice, prone to anger, cautious, master of stratagem, of many cares, dark, and libidinous. To it, of the body of man, are the two knees, and we'd probably add the hamstrings above. Yeah, it's sort of like the thighs, I guess, but like the lower part of the thighs
No,
above the knees.
yeah,
Yeah. Quadriceps and all that. All right, Ollie, do you wanna kick off with
yeah.
a plant?
Okay, I'm going to kick off with my which grows a lot. This is actually when I discovered this growing in the garden after I'd bought my current house, and it was like,
Ah,
oh, that's interesting. I moved it because it was in a very, very mist flower bed that hadn't been seen to in a long time, so it must be quite tough. It's Solomon seal or Polygonatum vulgare, which
nice
is rather fallen out of modern herbalists'
repertoire.
pharmacopoeia, which is a shame.
Okay.
Because I tincture my own, and that is from my garden, that picture indeed,
Yes.
and I find it very useful for a number of things. It's a herb of Saturn, but Kuberger doesn't actually put it into a particular zodiac sign, but I think looking at what it does, I would say Capricorn would be a very good choice. I mean, one of the things he does, he recommends it for weak joints, and in fact, he says you should bruise the root and then sort of strap them to the joint, and it's a sort of fail-safe cure. And I think again, knees are one of the major joints of the body, and but even more than that, he says to boil it up in wine, and I imagine that would mean a tincture would be effective as well, and use it
Yeah.
for broken bones. And of course, bones is a major Capricorn signature. And also for bruising, interesting, which then we get the skin signature again, which is another Capricorn one. And Culpepper recommends it for cleaning the skin as well. I mean, none other and wounds. Very good wound herb. I've never used it for wounds. I would usually go to yarrow, which is also very prolific in
Yeah.
my garden. But yeah, wounds and old sort of ulcerous wounds, he says, frightfully good for, and vomiting and bleeding as well. Now, some other interesting things that I found out about this as I was doing some reading is that I think it's Peter Holmes in his Big Energetics of Western Herbs said it's very good for malabsorption. And in fact, the Chinese use it in Chinese medicine for moistening mucosa or
Mm.
making mucosa moist, and for malabsorption in general. And the interesting thing is Saturn rules the retentive virtue in Galenic medicine, which covers all those things. It's the virtue which makes sure the right things get absorbed from food, things aren't excreted too quickly. So as you can see, those would very much apply to malabsorption if things aren't getting absorbed or getting absorbed and excreted too quickly. And also
Yeah.
the moistening the mucosa would be very, very relevant to that of retaining things and not allowing them to be expelled. So I think all of those very good for Solomon's seal. I use it for arthritis, rheumatism, things like that, which I find it very quite low doses, quite effective, in fact, which just as well because don't have that many roots in a garden.
No, no, it's funny. I'm just gonna run and grab. Funnily enough, I literally harvested some of my own
Oh,
a
really?
week ago, and I have a root drying. So I'm
Oh,
just gonna
brilliant.
go and
Yeah.
grab a root. We'll do a little show and tell because that's a very serendipity.
But it does like, and it's one of those ones that you can divide the root in winter sort of thing, early spring, and then have twice as much. It's once it gets established somewhere, it seems very happy, which is just as well. So you can, and it doesn't need a sunny spot in a garden either. So it loves shade. So there's no excuse, even if you have the shadiest garden in the world, not to be growing a bit of it. And it's a very pretty plant as well. She's quite extraordinary with these great sort of bending fronds, like a fishing rod, that come over with these little white flowers hanging from them.
Yeah, they are beautiful plants. They really are. And although I see from your picture that yours haven't been voraciously attacked by slugs as mine usually are, so
No.
I'm just, I'm just, I'm just going to stop the sharing, and then this is a little drying root. So they're the rhizomes. And were you just describing it, Ollie, with all the little rootlets that come
I
off?
haven't got to the rhizome yet, but that's
Okay,
just the top of it. But yeah,
because this is the bit that you use, right? And you can see sort of there. That's just an emerging shoot of just as it's about to grow. I mean, it's not focusing on that; it's focusing on me, which is all very nice. But I want it to focus on this.
that's
Yeah.
it.
There we go.
So
So you
they're
can
amazing
see the little
things.
the shoot just sort of like emerging there from
Yeah,
of the
that's
ground.
exactly
So
right.
yeah.
You're a bit of a bastard to wash when you dig them up, but well worth the effort.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, I haven't actually I've only got enough now, I think, probably after this year's harvest, maybe to make a very small 500 ml
Yeah,
batch
yeah.
of tincture. And I've previously used the Chinese species Polygonatum sibiricum, but
Oh, yeah.
they from what you were saying, Ollie, about them using it to, they do use two different species, at least according, they use Polygonatum odoratum
Yes.
and Polygonatum sibiricum. Or do they use
Yeah.
odoratum? I'm not sure, but I'm pretty sure they
I
use
think
two
they
different
do use
species, and they might be
Eldorado.
cooked or prepared in a different way.
I'm not sure because Holmes didn't go into details on that, alas. The other
Mm.
one that I've been told, and I can't think who told me this, is there's one capsule, something like Solomon Seals Giganticus or something, which has like, I've never been able to find it, but apparently if you can, then your lack of tincture troubles are over, as it's like
Oh my God, that would be amazing. Because, like, it's a fairly prolific plant. It's just that if you don't have acres, if
exactly.
you've got a little town garden, then you can't really
I mean, I did a
harvest
little
tons of it.
experiment this year. I got my roots and I juiced them, and then I recombined the juice and the and so and then tinctured that
Oh,
to
amazing. Okay.
and, which it did juice. The juice wasn't entirely happy. It was bastard to clean afterwards as well. So very fibrous. Um, but yeah, so that
Oh, interesting. Okay.
uh,
Yeah, I mean it's quite a beautiful rhizome when it's newly harvested. And I think back to the astrology, it's a
yes,
bit like you mentioned in the video Space Botany, which we talked about sort of plants, I think, or one of our previous videos anyway. Maybe the previous video we did about sort of Capricorn or the winter signs. In the northern hemisphere. You talked about comfrey being another possible herb of Saturn in
that's
Capricorn.
right. Yes,
And I think what the two have in common is they're the dignified Saturn, the well-behaved
yeah,
Saturn. They're the least toxic and the most helpful sort of form of Saturn. What's interesting about both of them, even though the effect of the herb is designated as drying overall, they both have this moisture to them. Like
Right.
the roots of this are juicy, and the leaves of comfrey are somewhat juicy. And as
Yeah.
I think that goes to your point, Ollie, about maybe retaining. So even though the planet is designated drying, Saturn is a dry planet, it's cold, yada yada. Because it's the sort of dignified Saturn, they have this. If used properly, they can have this sort of life affirming property
Definitely,
in a way.
definitely. So
Um,
anyway, I think this is one we should encourage people to bring back into their
oh, for sure. Yes,
I
this is
think it's
this is
very,
one that,
very useful.
especially now that we can't as herbalists use comfrey internally.
Absolutely, yes.
This is a really great alternative because while it has some low grade toxicity to it, it's pretty safe if you because it's got saponins which can cause
So,
gastrointestinal irritation if you use high
anybody who's got
doses.
broken bones healing would be fine, for
Yeah,
instance.
yeah, totally, exactly. All right, shall I dip into
What do you got for us, Marcos?
well, this is a herb that I've not used yet, so I feel slightly fraudulent talking about it, but it's because it's one that I'm excited about, and my excitement about these things usually precludes me becoming obsessed with them. So I think at some point I will use it a lot. I did try growing it a few years ago and didn't succeed, so I'm just going to try and find the picture of it. This is a plant called melancholy thistle, and Culpeper described it as a herb of Saturn in Capricorn. Not that one. It's I'll see if I can find a photo of it. There we go. This is off some website selling seeds.
Yes.
And it's quite pretty. Let me just enlarge. So just looks like a standard thistle. It looks a bit like the Scottish thistle,
It
actually,
does,
doesn't
doesn't
it?
it? Does it have sharp bits on it? It's like, is it?
No, it doesn't have any sharp bits on it. I don't think. I think the leaves
Yeah,
are
little
there's a
bit, bit
little
like
bit
wild
tiny,
lettuce sort of thing. Yeah.
yeah, like the little spines on the ribs
Yeah.
or on the edges or something. Let's see if we can find another picture. There's Wikipedia has some nice pictures. Yeah, you see, look,
Oh,
if you
there
look
it
at
is. Yeah.
the drawing on Wikipedia, no, not really. There's a little bit of prickliness, but it's just a suggestion. Anyway, I thought I'd just literally read Culpeper's entry on it because it's fascinating. So he says they flower in July or August. It's under Capricorn and therefore under both Saturn and Mars. One rids melancholy by sympathy, the other by antipathy. Their virtues are but few, but those not to be despised, for the decoction of the thistle in wine, I think, as you said earlier, that would be equivalent to a tincture, perhaps, being drank, expels superfluous melancholy out of the body and makes a man as merry as a cricket. Superfluous melancholy causes care, fear, sadness, despair, envy, and many evils more besides. But religion reaches to wait upon God's providence. Religion teaches to wait upon God's providence, beg pardon, and cast our care upon him who cares for us. What a fine thing it were if men and women could live so. And yet 7 years care and fear makes a man never the wiser, nor a farthing richer. So, I mean, he's basically saying, and he goes on to say, this is the best remedy against all melancholy diseases that grows. They that please may use it. So he is extremely effusive in his praise of this for melancholy, and yet this plant has nary a mention in Burton's Anatomy of Melancholy. You know, the 18th century sort of treatise on melancholy. I don't think he even mentions it. I may be wrong, but I think Burton, he talks about various plants, but I don't think he
And
mentions melancholy
is
thistle.
Culpeper using the aerial parts or the root? Does he?
He does not say, but I'm presuming the aerial part. And I did have a look. You can see even on the Wikipedia page, it mentions, describes the plant. I mean,
Right.
Wikipedia obviously not being necessarily 100% reliable as a source, but
Yeah.
it even mentions the medical use the plant was
Oh,
considered a
really?
possible cure for sadness. I mean, actually, depression.
Yeah.
Nicholas Culpeper said it makes man marry as a cricket. And yet, when you look on PubMed, this is the grand total of all research on Circeum. So no, nothing. So it's definitely a plant that is crying out, I think, for some investigation. But being in the thistle family, I mean that that they do have got some research on other species of Cirsium. So the genus has been researched a bit. So at some point, I'm going to do a dive into the phytochemistry of the other members of the genus. Because thistles often contain things like sesquiterpene lactones, which are quite bitter, and often polyphenols and stuff like that. So you can get some idea of what the phytochemistry of the plant might be. And often the thistles, do contain bioactive compounds, some of which might be hepatoprotective or hormone modulating or
Right, right.
anti-inflammatory or bacteriostatic or whatever. But I think this is a really, really interesting plant. So I'm going to be growing it and attempting to use it.
Excellent.
Yeah, and like most of the thistles, I don't know what temperature. He doesn't say what temperature it is. So I would presume, as a Saturnine plant, is more likely to be cool.
Yes, because he puts most thistles under Mars, doesn't he? And there's only a few that he puts under, well, there's one,
Yeah,
Jupiter.
he puts milk thistle under Jupiter,
Yes. And then
carduus under Mars.
Mars.
As you say, pretty much the rest of them under Mars, I think.
I think so, yes. So interesting.
Interesting that you put this one under Saturn, and of course the fact
Yes.
that, I think it's called melancholy thistle because it's sort of like the stems tend to bend, so their heads are sort of like,
Oh, yeah, sad thistle.
drooping and like looking down at the floor, and it's not very spiny. It's sort of like has a bit of a wilted vibe to it in some ways. So yeah. Anyway, interesting one. What's
Okay.
your next one?
Okay, well, this is one that I'd completely forgotten actually. So this is my bad that we mentioned the other day, which is Equisetum arvense, which is horsetail,
Oh, okay.
which is definitely under Saturn. But I think you mentioned you might place it under Libra, yeah?
Yeah,
Uh,
just hypothetically, but I mean, run through why you think it's
well, Paul Pepper again, he doesn't actually say what to put in it. I liked it. Obviously, it's a great, and this is the odd thing about it as well. If you look in Culpeper, he said it's very good for things like loose bowels, internal pain, the kidneys, and what we would call general anti-inflammatory, which obviously we don't like that word particularly, in ulcers and things. But modern research likes it for it's basically it's well, it's got very high salicylic acid, sorry,
yeah,
content.
so more like silica based,
Silica, it's
basically.
silica based, and
Yeah,
so it's very good for for the bones, for the cartilage, for the hair, for the nails, so people basically give it's for that sort of depletion. Um, it's what he's known for now, really. A lot of the other things in Kumpel Pepper, because it's not one I'd really looked up because I thought I knew it. It was like, oh
Mm.
goodness, all this stuff is pretty much new. I mean, he does kind of touch upon it, but he's mainly talking about, as you did for him, a sort of internal pain, urinary tract, etc.
Yeah.
But sort of in modern herbalism, I think it's certainly the way I was taught is like a sort of I've forgotten the word, uh, a nourishing sort of nutritive herb brings lots of useful sort of well, sort of
For the bones mainly, do
bone
you think?
earth-based things, which is very difficult to get that sort of level in plants of into the body of things which are
Yeah,
just
yeah, sort of like that plant equivalent of bone broth or something,
yeah, and
really.
but also nails and hair are all sort
Yes.
of under Saturn rulership as
Well,
well.
when they've done clinical trials, haven't they, in post-menopause women, particularly where that has been demonstrated clinically to
Yeah,
increase
yeah.
bone density.
So that's why I would chuck it in there. But again, Culpeper doesn't say, and that's one of the fun things about astroherbalism. We can have discussions about it. And
Yeah, and I totally follow you around those bends. I think there's a strong, there's a good rationale for thinking Capricorn in the sense that I do lean more towards Libra for a couple of reasons, just because of the urinary tract thing. So you might think, oh well, that's Scorpio. Okay, fair enough. You could, but because it has that sort of action against bleeding in the urinary tract, kidney stones, but it also the bone thing to me that one the reason I'd pop it up in Libra rather than Scorpio, Libra being sort of like the lumbar spine and the kidneys rather than Scorpio, which is the bladder and then maybe the bowels or the sexual bits, the genitals. I would pop it in Libra because even though the silica makes it a bit harsh on the kidneys, which might be an argument for putting it in Capricorn or not in Libra, because this is a plant that you don't want to give somebody who has kidney failure or kidney damage, because the mineral content is so high, it can sort of like lime scale up the kidneys or just scour them a bit, you know. So it's a bit harsh basically because the mineral content being so high. So you kind of you want to be a bit careful there, but it is used for stopping bleeding in the urinary tract and for preventing and possibly even treating gravel or kidney stones. But then the other reason I like it for Libra is because to me it looks like vertebrae with all the little nerve roots coming out of them, you know. So that's what it looks like the little fronds growing out of the nodes. It literally looks like a spinal column. And the fact that Maria Treben, the Austrian herbalist, she used it for all sorts of things. She was really fond of using in sitz baths, interestingly. It's a very Maria Treben thing. But she would say, so bladder, catarrh, and cramp-like pains, trouble urinating, gravel and stones in the kidney and bladder. So that could be like Libra or Scorpio, maybe. Then she talks about accumulation of water in the pericardium, pleura, or in kidney disorders. And then what's the other? So hemorrhaging, that's stopping bleeding. That's a very Saturn thing, sort of preventing stuff. Inflammation or bleeding in the gums, bronchitis, tuberculosis, all sorts of stuff here. Disc lesions. The worst, she says, I mean, this is Maria Treben, so she's very anecdotal. There's no scientific references here, but I love her work. She's sort of a very traditional herbalist, as in she sort of like downloads stuff, tries it, and then if it works, she goes, this is for that. Do you know what I mean? It's just like, it's very that. But she says disc lesions, insofar as they are not caused by a pinched nerve, often disappear very quickly through the use of horsetail sitz baths. If X-rays show degenerated vertebrae caused by age, there is no reason to suffer pain. The pressure of a kidney disorder pushes upward and along the spine. I'm not sure this is biomedically correct, but anyway, where it presses on the superficial nerves causing pain, as experience shows. Therefore, it is the pressure of the kidneys and not the disc lesions which causes the pain. A horsetail sitz bath, because of its deep penetration, relieves the pressure. I'm not sure that mechanical explanation is at all correct. But her experience, therefore, is that horsetail is helpful for kidney and bladder disorders in some cases, and in those sort of pinched nerves in the spine. And that may be because of what you were talking about, Ollie, the sort of the ability of this plant to sort of help repair osteopenic or osteoporotic tissue and connective tissue in general. So, yeah, it's an interesting one. And she also goes on to say that it could be useful through kidney disorders. I've been able to advise many unhappy people who, through kidney disorders, suffered from depression, delusions, and fits of rage, and would have ended in a mental home but for horsetail sitz baths. She's not afraid of grand claims without evidence, is Miss Treben, but it's a really interesting perspective on it, for sure.
Okay, no, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
You must reference the book afterwards, Marcos.
Yeah, it's a famous book. It's a Maria Treben, Health Through God's Pharmacy.
Right, I've not seen it, so that would be a good one.
Oh, really? It's a really, really good little book. I mean, as I say, she is literally just a famous Austrian herbalist, and I get the strong impression that she's a bit of a medium or something. She channels a lot of this stuff, and she gets it. Because there's this really improbable story she tells in the thing on Calamus, where she said she was listening to the radio, and the man suddenly started talking about this. Like, you heard that? That was like, that was not on the radio. Do you know what I mean? So, anyway. Yeah. So,
what's your last one?
My last one, and I haven't yet got a picture of it, so I might just grab a picture of it momentarily while I'm talking. But my last one is coffee, coffee Arabica.
Coffee bean.
Yeah, let me just see if I can find a picture of the coffee plant. So this is I'm 99.9% sure a herb of Mars. And this is an assignation that you won't find in Culpeper, obviously, because it's not a native herb or whatever. But I would say it's a herb of Mars in Capricorn. It's got these sort of red berries, and the leaves are quite smooth, so it's not prickly. It's just red berries that are stimulating, and so I thought that's Marsy enough. Um, I don't think it's super prickly though, so one might argue that it's not Mars, but I generally think of stimulants might be Marsy.
And it's got,
Um,
is it not red berries? The
it is, it is. I'm literally just grabbing a picture now. So it's a sort of evergreen. It looks quite holly-like, but the leaves aren't spiky.
yeah.
I've always assumed it's a Marsy herb because of the red berries and because it's a stimulant, and also because it's a notable choleretic. It increases bile output, and I've assigned it to Mars in Capricorn because that would be a well-behaved Mars. It's not a
Right.
toxic Mars. It's not a poisonous Mars. It's a Mars that's really highly valued and esteemed and on its best behavior. Why in Capricorn? Several reasons. Firstly, it's roasted, so that has that both Saturn and Mars element that Capricorn has, where Mars is exalted and Saturn rules, because it's made darker by roasting, and it's also the heat is applied, so it's sort of roasted. It has this sort of bitter and sour taste, which is both Mars and Saturn. And it was thought to be a plant which increased melancholy, interestingly. You think of
Interesting. I
coffee
didn't
as
know
something
that.
which
Right.
increased choler, right? But it actually, and I think that was the end process because it is a choleretic, but the end process if you drink a lot of coffee is you end up staying awake, and you gradually become more and more melancholic. You think a lot more, you become more anxious, so chronic coffee drinkers actually tend to be more melancholic than anything else, which is interesting. So even though it's a plant which purges choler from the system, it increases choler or heat. It literally increases the release of bile as well because it's choleretic. But I wanted to read a little piece from this is Dale Pendell's book, Pharmacodynamics. It's one of his trilogy on psychoactive plants. And I love his books. That he talks about psychoactive plants and substances in general. And he approaches them. He's like a sort of a magpie, like I bet he's a moon in Gemini, like Culpeper was, because he picks bits from here and bits from there and bits from everywhere, and then collages them together to come to. So he describes coffee here. It's in his section on what he calls the excitantia, which is how he classifies stimulants. He describes it as the ally, coffee, the perfect drug for capitalism. Is there an office anywhere that does not have its shrine to the coffee gods? And he says, on the other hand, it's not a bad beverage for anarchists or for town meetings. Who or what is it not good for? That should be our concern. To find that out, you'll have to quit. What about trying excess instead? And he's got signatures. Rambo, that's the French poet, not Sylvester Stallone. Rambo went to Africa after he gave up poetry. He dealt in coffee, slaves, and guns. And then he says, history. The history of global coffee production is a laboratory for world system theory of the interplay of globalized markets with domestic politics and the reciprocal tensions between social classes, public institutions, and the modern nation state. By 1900, each of the Central American countries was ruled by coffee barons or coffee oligarchies, and yet each country maintained distinctive features based on their own history and traditions. And then he goes on. I mean, it's a fantastic, like all of his expositions on drugs and plants and stuff are fantastic. But the point here is that coffee really is the plant avatar of and fuel of capitalism, and it drives that. It's a significant plant driver of, because like civilizations pick their plants, don't they? We pick our poisons, really. And coffee is the ultimate sort of like the 24-hour day, the grinding out of more work. It just goes hand in hand from its adoption in the West. Like even in Arabic times, it was used to sort of like it originally came from Africa, and then it was adopted by the Arabic countries in the Middle East, and then it came to Europe. And it's always been associated with a strong work ethic and getting more done. And then its adoption in Europe really paralleled the sort of Enlightenment sort of burst of both trade and I think the sort of really the rationalist collapse of the religious order. all of this is me. All of this screams to me about Capricorn. This is all Capricorn. You know,
Absolutely,
Capricorn, the fall
absolutely.
of Jupiter, the higher the sign of hierarchy, the climbing up of the levels. You know, the one gains at another's loss. The
Yep, yep,
constant
yep.
grind. Grind is a Capricorn word. The grind. And what do we talk about coffee? When we talk about coffee, we talk about the grind. You know what I mean? Like literally. So to me, it's a planet of the exalted Mars in Capricorn.
And yeah,
Um,
exactly, yeah,
on
exactly.
every level, like
On every
medicinal,
level.
in terms of its humoral nature, in terms of its historical associations, like all the things. So that would be my final pick.
Brilliant. Yeah, wow. Really interesting. I mean, Capricorn's an interesting sign anyway. Well, they're all interesting signs, but I think it, as you
Yes.
say, it's particularly interesting for some. I mean, I don't know. I mean, yeah. Where am I going with this?
Was it the two natures bit, Ollie? Because that bit really, from the traditional stuff, that is the thing that's so different and that tends not to be talked about now. You
Yeah,
know,
yeah,
we
because
talk.
do not all immutable signs are they not double natured?
Yeah, but Capricorn's not mutable, is it? It's a cardinal.
It's a cardinal. That's interesting. Yes, because that's I didn't learn that in astrology school. That might even it was this.
Yeah. So the having two natures, absolutely all the mutables, the Jupiter and Mercury ruled signs,
Yeah,
100%.
yeah.
But Capricorn,
Saturn one with that is really interesting, isn't it?
because the constellation that it was named after was the sea goat.
Yes.
And I wonder also perhaps it's that duality of you know the winter is beginning and the weather's getting colder, but the nights are
Yeah.
shrinking and the
Not
light
shrink,
is increasing,
etc.
and maybe there's a bit of that in there too. Although why that would be true of Capricorn and not Cancer, for example. So I suspect it's more the constellation
Actually, you've got to
imagery.
think with cancer is it's sort of like crabs are kind of amphibious. They can rush out and live on land.
True. Yeah, there's a parity there, isn't there? I mean, like Capricorn's the only one that seems to have been doing any genetic engineering, but yes, I mean there is there is some parity there for sure. It's a very interesting one, and I think maybe in the plants that we've chosen, I mean the two natures, does that show up? Um,
I think so. And in a way, let's have a think about that. The two natures. Well,
Well, one being watery and the other one being cold and dry and earthy. And I think
yes,
it
it does.
does
It does. It
because
does.
that's what we were talking about with the Solomon seal and with the
Yes.
comfrey and with the dryness of the Saturn ruled sign and its assignation to dead bits of the body like the nails and hair, but then also living bits, but things which are on the outside
Yeah.
like the skin
Yeah.
or the bones that support you.
Well, of course,
Um,
I mean, horsetail's a classic because it's a urinary system, which you couldn't get much wetter than that, but it's also
yeah,
the bones, which you can't get much drier, sort of thing.
Yeah, and
So,
same with I mean with melancholy thistle might be a little bit more difficult to argue because we don't know so much about its action apart from the fact that it's appropriated to melancholy traditionally. Coffee, as I say, that's my thinking that would be, but the two natures of coffee, I don't know. That's an interesting one. I have to think about that one. See if it has the sort of like the combination of some wet element intrinsically and some dry element, something like that. But anyway, that's I think
anyway,
I think with, I think we've dug up some interesting
I
ideas.
got some interesting ideas. Food for thought, definitely.
Food, yeah, definitely food for thought for us. We need I'm going to have to do more thinking about the two natures of Capricorn and how that's relevant to plants now. So yeah.
Brilliant. All right. Well, till next time, Marcos. Thank you very much.
Anyway, thanks for watching, folks. If you enjoyed this, please like it, share it, subscribe, do all the things, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
See you next time, everyone. Bye bye.
Bye.